I've been speaking in a different way about the Fed in the last couple of months than I had been before. And that's because, for whatever reason, they have come around to views quite close to mine. They think inflation is the primary concern. They explicitly recognize that there's going to need to be increases in unemployment to contain inflation.
Yes, folks, Larry Summers, they're the living embodiment of everyone's revulsion of the Clinton administration and the World Bank, saying unemployment needs to continue to get worse. Inflation. Hello, David.
Hey, man, how are you doing?
I'm good, folks. It is Left Reckoning 100.
It's pretty sick, man. I mean, it feels like it's flown by. I'm always surprised that we've been able to put out so many of these.
Yeah, I know. If you blindfolded me and spun me around 3 times, like 2 weeks ago, and asked me how many episodes we're up to, I might have said like 54.
We probably need to go check the back catalog because a couple weeks we have misnumbered episodes before.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. We actually just reached 3,000 on Majority Report, and we didn't comment on it really at all. And that's for that reason. Like, I probably effed up somewhere, so let's just be a little bit chill about these milestones and just sort of like be happy around them with the and sort of approximate it.
No, but I mean, in all honesty, to everyone who's been with us from the get-go and to folks who've just joined us recently, like, really appreciate all the support. It's been a hell of a lot of fun and very fulfilling being able to do this with all of y'all, and you especially, Matt. I mean, we didn't really launch this under conditions of our own choosing, but I'm pretty proud of the stuff we've been able to put out over the past couple of years.
Yeah, it's gone by so fast, and I look back to when we started this, and it was not really positions that we were super speaking for myself, like I wasn't super comfortable with this sort of I like being behind the camera. It's nice. Nice back there.
Nice. It's nice to be able to chime in as a wise guy every once in a while
when you got something good. Yeah,
conversation. Yeah,
absolutely. But here we are, and it's been, I mean, I feel like there's a long way for us to go too.
I mean, some big narratives we've been through. Joe Biden's secret FDR was the first one that we were jumped into.
Right.
Then Bitcoin is going to save Palestine and the world.
Sorry, so we do need to get to the crypto guys, but that Larry Summers thing does bring us full circle on the whole FDR Joe Biden, and vampires are in full control when it comes to this sort of financial policy now.
I mean, you have the Powell at the Fed saying that more unpopular decisions are going to be needed, which I think shows you about everything you need to know about the state of the American economy and American political discourse right now. They're worried about that the unemployment rate isn't high enough, which is a pretty ass backwards way to think about politics. But yeah, I mean, the Bitcoin thing, I remember when we first started covering Bitcoin, people would get really mad and talk to us about, well, you don't understand that the blockchain is actually really revolutionary, or NFTs or smart contracts. There are all these other uses for it. And it's not dead yet, but I think we've been
but it is funny because at that time, if people would waste their time and go back and watch closely, I did give myself out saying, I'm never going to predict when this stuff is going to bottom out, basically preparing us for the long fight. Like, this is all BS, regardless of if you're able to flip it to some other sucker. But reality hit pretty severely this summer.
Yeah. But we got a fun show coming up for everybody. In just a couple of minutes, we're going to have Bhaskar Sunkara on, a good friend and founder of Jacobin magazine, and now El Presidente at the Nation magazine. Really excited to be having him on. I'll save my intro for when we get him on the show. But after that, we got Brian Mier of TeleSur and Brasilwire on to talk about the dumb coup in Brazil, which, I mean, that's another one that we got to live through, is the ebbs and flows of the last couple of years of the Bolsonaro presidency, and then the pretty triumphant rise of Lula, which is something I just can't celebrate enough, honestly. And I don't think we've been able to take our victory lap, because like this episode was supposed to be our victory lap on the Lula stuff, and we had to talk about a bunch of right wingers in Brazil soccer jerseys storming the presidential palace.
We had Brian scheduled before that even happened, thinking we're just going to talk about how like Bolsonaro sulked off and wouldn't hand off the sash, and instead, we got a repeat, and even like a dumber, like somebody pointed out, like learned nothing from January 6th. Even like, as Brian pointed out, kind of like less, like they didn't even do it when it was in session, when there was actually anything like going on.
They missed the point.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good. I mean, I think it's played out, but the first is tragedy. Then it's farce, like very much, I think, plays for the January 8th riots in Brazil. And yeah, don't forget, everybody, in just a couple of weeks, we're going to be in New York City with Bhaskar. We're going to be there with Ben Burgess, Jason Miles, Emma Vigland, myself, Matt Leck, and Mr. Sam Cedar from a little podcast called Majority Report. I'm really looking forward to that show. Those tickets are selling really quick, so you want to make sure that you can snag them as soon as possible. There's links in the show notes below to do that. Also, I think we're going to have some T-shirts. We have a special.
I was going to say
now that you can only get at that show.
Exclusive merch. So people, if you want to come support us in the first time ever. I mean, played Brooklyn a number of times, but never Manhattan.
I know we're moving up.
It's a little bit classy. It's funny, like Steven Crowder, he's been doing shows in New Jersey and calling it like his New York shows.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's like, bro, you're in like Trenton. Like,
That's pretty awesome.
I don't know if that really counts, but yeah.
Yeah, and of course, this weekend for patrons, we're going to be having a theory reading. I think we're going to do a 2-part series on Rosa Luxemburg, who I think, like, for a name that I think a lot of people recognize. I think somebody who is widely underread on the left these days. So we'll be pulling from them. And of course, we're setting up here in Texas for another legislative session. They're very rare. So people are going to have to deal with me trying to cover as much as I can of that, because some pretty shady stuff is coming down the pipeline. And it's always really depressing to watch, and also really funny because the window is so short that they don't always get.
Yeah, this is like a relic of, we don't want you to be doing anything.
So this is like anti-government government.
Right. Yeah,
I think. I mean, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Texas has the shortest legislative session in the country, which is insane for a state that's big.
If anyone doesn't like Texas, I'd be curious. Maybe it's more common in the South, or maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's more common.
I mean, I think other states have like shorter ledge sessions, but I mean, Texas is pretty extreme,
right?
So we'll be covering that. They're trying to get casino gambling done here, which is pretty wild. Because to do that, who is the guy? Adelson.
You don't got casinos in Texas?
No, they don't have casinos. But they didn't get the lottery here until like the 90s, and that took a huge fight. So, anyways, we're going to be covering that in the next couple of weeks, or I guess, yeah, we'll be covering that as much as we can coming up. But I don't know. I think if you're ready, let's bring in our first guest of the evening, Mr. Bhaskar Sunkara, founder of Jacobin magazine and now the president of The Nation magazine.
Hey, how are you guys?
Hey.
I took a lot of liberties when he said like around 8:10 and arrived at 8:11. Hopefully not too late.
Oh no, it's perfect, man.
It was great. I should also say, Bhaskar is a great deep threat on the basketball court. I hear.
Oh God, I'm not good at basketball. There was a time when I was good at shooting, so they're not the same thing. If I'm playing threes, or I could get exposed, but if I'm playing fours, you normally like hide in the corner, or get free if you're playing full court. But yeah, I'm good at shooting. I'm not good at basketball. It's very, very different.
JJ Redick, a little bit in modern NBA,
yeah. JJ Redick was 5'6", and
Matt, you're a shooter too, aren't you?
I could shoot okay. I was a decent, before they talked about 3-and-D guys, I was a 3-and-D guy.
I'm pretty like I have the worst shot, but I'm good at rebounds. So like I can just like hang out under the basket and feed it out to y'all.
Yeah, you're big and athletic enough that you can mess with some people. Yeah, that's why I don't need father.
Yeah. But and also, we just pitched it, but reminding folks that Bhaskar is going to be hanging out with us in just a couple weeks in New York City at the Cutting Room, January 22nd, with Ben Burgess, Jason Miles, Emma Vigland, Sam Cedar, Matt, and myself. Which thanks again for doing that. I think that's gonna be a lot of fun. I mean, we did one a few years back.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Actually, we did an event for TMBS at the Bell House, right? That was fun. That was a fun night. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Hoping to get a similar vibe. But anyways, man, I mean, I'm really thank you so much for coming here and joining us for Left Reckoning 100. I was, it's this time of year, I think, when we're all sort of trying to plot out what's coming in front of us. And, I don't know if you know this, Bhaskar, but the first time my first day on TMBS was, I think it was like episode 3, episode 4, something like that. And you were on there. And I remember that because I didn't know where a studio was, and I knew you were going to be on there, and I sort of saw you going up the elevator, and I followed you up to find the studio. But I remember that episode very, very well. And I remember you talking with Michael about a point that I think was a really important one. And to be fair, I was a little annoyed with it when you made it at the time, but it was very prescient, I thought, which was that, like, if Bernie Sanders were to win, it would probably be a fairly disappointing experience because, like, we didn't have the apparatus and, the structures that would probably be necessary to put in a lot of the things that we would want to do. And, looking back at not just the fact that, those elections weren't successful, but just seeing what the state of, like, the progressive left, or even more importantly to me, like the Democratic Socialist left is, I think that probably was what was coming if we were able to sort of pull it out at the end. And I know this is a broad question, but I mean, we had these two campaigns, 2016, 2020, that I think gave a lot of people on the left a lot of purpose right now. And since I feel like folks have sort of scattered in a lot of different directions. And, as somebody who is a publisher of, some great publications out there, I was just curious what your sense is of, like, what we have to be focusing on, where you think some of these important struggles and fights are going into 2023 and even more broadly in the next few years.
So the left, I think, is better off than it was like a decade ago in that it actually exists, which I think is something that we shouldn't take for granted, because we had a time when the far left of America was like Jon Stewart, and maybe not Jon Stewart, maybe like Chris Hayes and some of our homies, Sam's friends from their America days, where what passed for the American left, and now
the Nation too.
Yeah, I mean, the Nation was definitely a beacon. In times, like, I remember reading when I was in high school, the Nation for the Alexander Coburn columns, and everyone would have, a favorite columnist or whatever else, but it was one of the few venues that actually gave the left a hearing. Now, of course, there's a lot of leftists around. Democratic Socialists of America is, roughly like 20 times bigger than it used to be, somewhere in that neighborhood. But I think that we're in pretty bad shape compared to where we were a couple of years ago. And as testament to that, I would ask people whether they think in the popular imagination there's a distinct left-wing third kind of force in the United States. So it used to be that we kind of had our cake in 82. We had Bernie Sanders running in a Democratic Party primary, so we didn't have to waste our time building independent ballot lines and things like that. Yet we were still able to have an independent profile in American politics. So if someone asked you what's a Bernie-crat or what's a Bernie Democratic Socialist, they would have said wealth inequality, Medicare for all, hates millionaires and billionaires. There would have been a defined identity. Now I don't think there is much of a defined identity from more amorphous progressivism within the Democratic Party. And I think a lot of what it means to be a radical or leftist is often defined by someone's position in the culture war. And whether you're scolding someone or whether you're unhappy about America, or whether you're quote unquote woke, I think that this is how people define what it is to be a leftist. And I think our elected officials like AOC and others haven't done a great job differentiating themselves from mainstream Democrats the way that Bernie for a time was able to do. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm not even sure that isn't necessarily even where it would lead. I'm not going down the path of the Jimmy Dorism, criticism, but I think it is true that the left, in my mind, is not as defined, and Medicare for all is a great litmus test for the health of the left, and it's totally off the agenda.
Yeah, I mean, for me, not trying to get into the forced vote stuff again, but for me, I felt like the railroad vote was much more of a defining moment than anything, and not even about the strategy, because at this point it's you don't have the votes to stop what Joe Biden's trying to do, but if the point of us having DSA or Democratic Socialist politicians out there is to sort of delineate between our politics and Democratic Party politics, I feel like that was a moment where it really wasn't on the national agenda or awareness. That not only do we think that workers should be paid better, but we think that it is unjust for the United States government to be able to dictate to workers what kind of conditions they have to accept.
Yeah, and I think that the reason why the squad did what they did with that vote was because they thought that pushing the paid sick days behind the scenes, and they listened to the union bureaucracy that basically told them to do that. So I think that part of it is true, but it's also that also tells you something about their strategy. A lot of what they want to do is exert pressure behind the scenes. Whereas, obviously, the Freedom Caucus example is one that we can't overstate, because the left's tactics by nature, our strategy, is different than the right's because of our ideology. We believe in mass politics. We believe in the self-emancipation of the working class, and you can't do that through a few parliamentary gains. And I think this Polish Marxist, or he was a Marxist when he wrote this, Leszek Kolowski, once said that the left can have ideology, but the right is nothing but the accumulation of tactics. And I think that's basically true. So I'm not saying that there was an easy route to do a kind of a Freedom Caucus holding the House hostage, but I think that the fact that the squad, even if it had the leverage, we can't imagine them doing it, I think is a bad sign, if only because our goal, I think, is to create this third front in American politics and to propagandize and organize in a mass way, in a very different way than Congress, for an egalitarian agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I watched AOC on day 4 of the McCarthy stuff talk about the strategy, and she mentioned one thing which I thought was I think it was interesting overall, and she's I think better at communicating than some people on the left give her credit for. But there's one thing she said about the committees, which is when you start to leapfrog people on committee assignments, you start upsetting the party structure. It's that needs to happen though. We need to be leapfrogging committee seats, and to the extent, if that can't be happening, that needs to be elaborated, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie has more power. He's a junior senator from Vermont. He has more power than the senior senator from Vermont because he used his leverage to leapfrog, in the Senate. I mean, so yeah. I think that I think a lot of it is personalized through AOC, for better or worse, but that's because when the left doesn't have a mass force, we become focused too much on our handful of politicians, and also our media outlets. But again, I do think there's a lot of there's a degree of complacency that comes from having won some gains and then just saying, all right, we're going to consolidate. That's fine. A lot of the Trotskyist left that I was once more sympathetic to, and I still have some sympathies to, often talk about union bureaucracies and party bureaucracies like they're by nature evil, whereas like at some point you need to consolidate gains, you need to pause in advance and figure out what you're going to do next. But I think all we basically have to have shown from the last few years is a few more elected officials and the Democratic Party moving a little bit to the left on a few issues. But our core message is a radical egalitarian one, that the US order is fundamentally unjust, right? That there's millions of people who aren't getting their fair share, and there's tens of thousands of people leeching off them. And we need a very different economic order, and we need a set of basic social protections that include state-run healthcare and a host of other demands. Those are just the immediate steps that Bernie laid out very clearly in 2016, a little bit less clearly in 2020, but it was still there. And I just feel like that clarity is gone. And even if you go to, the DSA join site and you read like the messaging, you're like, wow, we've lost the Bernie messaging. Whereas the Bernie messaging wasn't the problem. We maybe needed some more organizing and more militancy around carrying out the agenda. But it seems like we not only have lost what was useful, like the mainstream, but still radical messaging, but we're combining it with a set of tactics that won't even get things done.
This is like the thing, and like this is the kind of conversation that's not very good for like YouTube stuff, because it's not like point scoring. But you're talking about mass politics earlier, and like for me, what frustrates me so much about the moment that we're in, the state that I think the left or the socialist left is in this country, is that like just again using the force of the vote thing as an example, right? Not even talking about the merits of the strategy. I didn't think it was the best strategy. I'm not against militancy from elected officials, but it didn't really make a lot of sense to me, particularly because if what we're doing right now is if like, let's say we have like this strategy, this thing that could sort of open up the door to open up a Medicare for all in this country, which is something that we desperately need. And the vehicle that we're using for that is like public media pressure campaigns on like a couple elected officials to hope that they go with us. I think we sort of lost the plot at that point. You know what I mean? Like you have to have like some kind of mass structure organization beforehand. You can't just sort of build that up in these kind of parliamentary moments where there's some kind of tactical opening to maybe do something or not. And what's been so frustrating for me, especially like the couple years past the Bernie loss in 2020, is that there hasn't been that much of like a real reckoning or thinking about how to build that. Instead, like, I mean, the hegemonic like culture that we're in is very individualistic. And what's I feel like has happened more often than not is like people have sort of crystallized their like left-wing identity and like whatever perspective it is that they have, versus thinking about how to be building a mass movement that in moments like this could actually have some kind of political effect in politics.
So the one kind of counter I would give you to one of your examples is Occupy itself, which emerged because of a bizarre call in Adbusters and tactics that were just these ultra leftist tactics of occupation that really got their trial in the US at like the UC system occupations and a few other occupations, like the New School occupation at the time I thought was like useless to say the least. And yeah, then it became something. So at a moment where there is no mass activity, where politics is at a low, I think this is the moment where we need more voluntarism, not less. And I want to put force of vote aside because it was particularly unusual the way it was used and the way it was harnessed to kind of build certain brands in a certain style that I thought was like very counterproductive. But that aside, I do think that it would be useful. I don't think there's anything to lose by kind of putting our chips in and failing. Maybe we just need to pick our spots or pick the campaign, but more activity is a good thing. And for me, I thought there was a moment where maybe it could come from a labor populism, kind of out of the Starbucks and Amazon workers campaigns and other efforts to link labor solidarity in with just a message of equality and economic equality that ordinary, particularly younger working class people can tie themselves into, whether they're at Starbucks or Amazon or just like at a similar part of the labor market. And I still think something like that will emerge, but we have to be willing to take advantage of those opportunities when they arise.
Yeah, do you think they arise on the federal level? Do you think there's any possibility, like, I mean, just like thinking in New York State here, we had Hochul just on one with like insane priorities, and we do have a DSA contingent. Like, do you think like the state level is any more fruitful for possibly creating this sort of identity?
Has to be national, just because when you're like politics all around the world, but particularly in the US, it has such a hollowed out party structure
Mhm.
and has such a hollowed out left, is happening at the national level and through mass media and communications. And I'm not a populist in theory, in that, I'm a fairly orthodox Marxist in theory, but tactically, I think that taking advantage of a big national us versus them discourse and trying to, maybe it'll take root in one state, but I would compare, I think about how radical Wisconsin was in terms of like the occupation and
Mm.
the amount, how connected it was with labor. Um, it really was on a massive scale for Wisconsin. Like if Wisconsin was a country, then like the whole country was in a level of real turmoil and politicization, and became like the topic that everyone across the state was talking about. But that had very little ripple effects throughout the country. Whereas Occupy, the Bernie campaigns, Black Lives Matter, these are things that were national to some degree. You could say that Occupy and BLM were, to begin with, largely media events that turned into something more substantial after. They weren't social movements in the way that real organic mass social movements like the farmers movement in India or the landless workers movement in Brazil, you could really say, had these deep, really just mass on a scale we can't even comprehend in the US. So yeah, I think it has to happen nationally. I think elections are a great way, and candidate like Bernie campaign was a great way to put certain issues on the agenda. The next step is obviously we need to tie that to organization, but why not keep trying to replicate certain parts of the Bernie campaign while we're building more organizations? And the last thing I'll say is that DSA is a socialist organization that was basically built out of the Bernie moment to 100,000 members. Now, maybe the next step is for the next upsurge to build a broader organization that is a class-based organization that's built around left populist rhetoric and the demands of economic redistribution that, of course, would need to be tied in with socialists, and socialists would need to be at the forefront of, but might take the version of an American Podemos instead of just a more narrow, ideological, and by nature somewhat sectarian. And I say this as a DSA member since literally age 17, organization.
I guess like I'm curious what you think about this though, because I do agree that I think like the national scope is very critical. But one thing that I do wonder about is that because people ask us, we do Q&As on the show all the time, so people ask us questions all like, well, who are we lining up behind in 2024, right? Because I think so many people, like, their political experience really has been mediated so much through Bernie Sanders' campaign that I think a lot of people have a hard time thinking about politics outside of just, I'm not even talking about like electoralism versus non-electoralism. I'm talking about like presidential campaigns as something on the national level versus more like united congressional campaigns or however you'd want to think about that. I'm curious, like, what you think about this, because like the thing with the presidency question is like, I could definitely see how like potentially like if we really had like another potential vibrant Sanders style presidential thing in the future, it might be something that could really jolt things back into operation, help us sort of learn from some of those mistakes, build some of that organizational structure. But what I'm more worried about is that without having a bench of people that I could really like rattle off to you, of people who I would sort of want to throw my hat behind on a presidential campaign, that, you know, we do sort of like redirect this movement into sort of being more led and trailing like a kind of, you know, still positive in a sense, but like a more progressive versus a socialist politics in this country. And I can see that happening in like 24, 28, that like a lot of this just sort of gets brought into more reformist, progressive, capitalist candidates. But I'm curious if you have any feelings on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think Bernie was unique in that he could both lead and he had better socialist credentials than any other major politician in the U.S. You already saw the way in which Fetterman, who, you know, obviously has been great and still is great relative to your baseline Democrat, has shied away from Medicare for all and certain other things in the context of a very difficult race. You know, I'm still glad he won.
Totally.
If I was in Pennsylvania, I would be
the nuke bro too, which I like.
What's that?
He's a nuke bro too, which I like.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's good. That's good. But I think that one thing to consider is that why aren't there labor leaders running for president? Why can't, as a pressure or protest, why isn't Sean O'Brien? Wouldn't he be great? You know, obviously he has a lot of work to do. They're planning some big campaigns, but in 2028, like why? So maybe the metric should be not, are you socialist or not, but is it a class struggle candidate or not? And I think the vast majority of Democrats are not class struggle oriented Democrats, even the ones who occasionally talk in a anti-big, anti-monopoly sort of way. Like I like Ro Khanna a lot. But Ro Khanna obviously is one of those anti-big, anti-monopoly, candidates. Also, he does tie it to like a more industrial policy, caring about the manufacturing working class, stuff like that, which honestly he doesn't have to do, given that he's in a safe blue district and it's pretty good. But Warren, there's so many people like that, and I think they could compare differently to other Democrats that, regardless of where they stand with their self-identification, and Bernie's self-identification, I think is really an accident of history, given where he grew up, where he was politicized. It's this identity that clung with him. But could we potentially get a candidate the left can rally behind that's a class struggle candidate and who doesn't necessarily have to identify as a socialist? And I think like a Sean O'Brien candidate would be good. A Fetterman from 2 years ago candidate would be good. Because again, you're not maybe trying to build an entire edifice of a movement around a candidate, but you are using the bully pulpit for politics that's built around the polarization of class and a few key immediate demands like that should be a litmus test, quite frankly. I think Medicare for all is one that should be a litmus test. But yeah, I definitely worry that the next Elizabeth Warren will be where the left puts its energy. But I think we should be able to get something better.
Yeah, I kind of felt that way about Katie Porter announcing for senator in California, and like she's above average for a Democrat, but it'd be nice to have in California even something a little bit better than maybe Katie Porter.
That was your cue to say something. I'm just kidding.
Oh, sorry. I thought David was having technical problems. Yeah. Are you right, David?
No, I'm fine. You guys are both sitting still, so I thought that my whole thing had frozen on me.
I was looking at you being concerned.
That's why I don't do live stream. Next time you have me on, we're gonna have to pre-record. But yeah, no, I think for sure. I guess the question is like, what is DSA actually doing that's useful, and what are leftists? If you're watching this and you're feeling depressed, like here's what you should do. You should look at the Emergency Worker Organizing Committee, which DSA is helping to lead along with UE and union partners. And there's a big nurses strike going on in New York. The DSA members have been a key part of Amazon and Starbucks organizing. Like, I think that's really a place where anyone can get involved with either directly in rank and file union efforts or in solidarity work. I think there's still a really important future for Medicare for All in the U.S., and there's still a lot of organizations that are worth joining and being a part of and figuring out how to push that agenda. I think we got fairly close given U.S. history compared to a couple years ago with putting this forward. I think the next time this emerges, it'll be even stronger. And then more importantly, we're ready for a moment of crisis and rupture and activity, because we just have a much larger core of people who not only just vaguely consider themselves socialists, but who have been thinking about these issues, meeting other people, creating networks in similar organizations. So I think there's plenty of things in the meantime. So definitely not saying pin your hopes on a presidential campaign. But, I also don't think you could really pass up the chance to reach millions of people the way we have the last couple election cycles.
And I think too, building up that stable is something that's really critical. I mean, it's something that it makes me really sad. Here in Austin, I don't know if you follow or are familiar, but Greg Casar, who's now in Congress, was a DSA member for a very long time. Was a city council member, fairly radical. Comes out of worker organizing, and then ends up having this really, out of line position on Palestine that sort of puts him at odds with the DSA. He sort of disaffiliates, revokes his endorsement process. And that was one thing that was really disappointing because, again, I'm not even trying to comment on the specifics of that because I can get both sides. I can understand why Greg Casar didn't want to go up against DMFI money in his congressional campaign. I can also understand DSA members saying that these are sort of lines that we need to start setting now, because if we don't enforce them early on, then we won't ever. But I think that one thing that is really critical, that's long-term work, but you can be doing now, is doing that kind of local politics with the national politics in mind, in the sense of building up people in the organizations who have this background or care for working class politics, mass politics, who are then able to maybe run for office in a few years, get that political experience, and not just in the sense of oh, so your resume looks good when you run for office, but understanding how the state operates, understanding how politics operates, understanding how you can be an effective socialist or leftist in government, oftentimes in conditions where you're the only one or part of a small minority. I think that's something that we need to be looking at. But actually, I want to ask you something more specific, because one thing that I've been feeling a lot about the DSA members on the congressional level is that right now you have people who have affiliations with DSA, and I know there's a lot of work being done to try to make that relationship a little bit more formalized. But on the congressional level, I think that we sort of need to have a DSA caucus, or call it whatever you want, the pro-worker caucus or something like that. So instead of it being a bunch of, individual politicians who we hope sort of act in a cohesive way, are actually sort of organizing and thinking and doing politics together. But, is that just me sort of wanting to have a name to call?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've advocated for that for a long time. I think the tricky part is the individual members are stronger than the organization and don't need the organization. So it'd be dangerous to try to discipline people that one, just are broadly net useful representatives of are willing to call themselves democratic socialists in America, broadly on the right side of things, would not necessarily want that level of discipline. So maybe you could say in the future, you could have DSA members who are closer to the national organization and who are part of a caucus, in addition to a wider orbit of squad members and regular Democrats who maybe are not part of a caucus, but still are endorsed by the organization, or at the very least still, identify as democratic socialists and are kind of looser around the orbit. And my ideal world, you would have something closer to what you have in New York City and Chicago, and in Albany at the state level in New York, where you do have a more disciplined caucus of members. And the way parliamentary caucuses work, for people who don't know, they're not like you have to vote with the group on every single vote, but you pick certain topics that are considered key or essential or kind of party line, you know, points where you have to vote together, like matters of war and peace or labor policy or whatever that might be. And on those votes, you have to vote, together. You figure out what you're gonna, you're gonna have an internal vote, and then you vote along those lines. And then on other votes, you can just vote freely. You're conscious on all sorts of other issues, and it's a way that parliamentary systems work around the world. It just doesn't work in the US because we have something even worse than a two-party system. We have a no-party system.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so in other countries, I've been a registered Democrat since I was age 18. And I registered to become a Democrat when I registered to vote, or when I, got my full license at the DMV. I think I registered to vote at the same time, and I picked D because even though I was already a DSA member, because I wanted to participate in primaries, and that's where the action was in Democratic Party primaries. Over the next decade or so, I did little less politically than attack Democrats. I voted for Jill Stein twice. I voted for Howie too, and I still get attacked for that some by even fellow leftists sometimes. But I'll tell you that they actually went to where I worked, and both of them asked for my vote. I was like, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, they never asked for my vote. Not surprisingly, they didn't win, because that strategy of voter outreach is probably not going to work. But who was I to deny Howie? But I did all these things. I attacked Democrats. I, wrote articles about Hillary Clinton's complicity in the Honduran coup and the intervention in Libya, and did all these things. And there was nothing the Democratic Party could do. The Democratic Party legally cannot stop me from voting in the primary. That's a crazy thing. That would only happen in the United States because the states run elections and the states provide parties with access to ballot lines, but parties can't conduct their own elections. So they're very loose structures where it has proven quite easy for democratic socialists to run and win on the Democratic Party ballot line. I think what kind of we were getting at before was, it is not a great thing when you're on the Democratic Party line and you start to resemble an ordinary Democrat. That kind of defeats the purpose of the strategy. But in other cases, when you're on the Democratic Party ballot line and you have a distinct profile and a distinct set of demands, then it's a very good thing. It's far more effective than all the years of third party politics that many of us on the left were engaged with.
This is the thing that I think infuriates me the most, is about a lot of like the big fights that happen on the left now. It's like the conversation about the Democratic Party, I feel like, are very like moralistic, like holy, in the sense of like, you just saying, Bhaskar, that, you registered as a Democrat, is going to piss off a lot of people, despite the fact that a lot of those people who are mad probably are registered Democrats and don't even recognize what you're saying. In the sense that, like, if they voted in any Democratic Party primary in New York, you have to, right? That's just how it works there. And it's like, absolutely, we know what the Democratic Party is. We know it's not our party. But I've never understood, the people getting worked up about, if you do it in the sense of like you're trying to run candidates in a place where you're not going to be able to get access on a ballot without, running in a Democratic Party primary, and you don't have these requirements that all these people sort of expect. Like, there isn't really a party apparatus in this country, party system in this country, that is even like very powerful in dealing with its own membership, right? So you can run like pretty antagonistically to like the leadership of the party and do all those things. And like, I'll be honest, do I think that so far as we've seen it in practice from like the quote unquote squad, has it been done really well? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of things that have been mistakes, but the moralism about it, does sort of frustrate me. It's like very much like, is your soul good? Are you getting into heaven? Versus like, how can we sort of see politics as they are in the United States today and try to build some kind of alternative?
Yeah, American politics is just it's very Protestant. It's all about cleansing your soul, yeah, it's true on both left and right. There's an instinctive kind of moralism, and that's why, honestly, I think the kind of radicalism that changes America for the better will probably be a more homegrown egalitarianism that speaks in a more moral rhetoric than I think any of us are at the moment comfortable with, because we're basically, we're more analytical Marxists, at core when we think about politics and change. And I think there is a sort of moral fervor of the original populists and the early Socialist Party before they kind of hardened, that we could tap into. But it's certain aspects of it, especially when done cynically, are quite hard to deal with.
But like I know, Matt, you have this good question to end on, so I want to get there. But I just want to say really quick, like on third party stuff, man. Like again, I would much rather like I don't like vote for Democrats. Like I was a Jill Stein voter, all that kind of stuff. Like when I show up and vote, like I vote for I'm very happy when I could cast a ballot for Greg Casar on Democratic Party ballot line. But like, I'm not somebody who gets like weepy eyed and excited about voting for Democratic Party candidate. Oftentimes I'll vote green or whatever the thing is. But I know that also like that's not doing politics very much at this point, just in the sense that like it's not opening up a lot of space because it's like 4% of the vote or whatever. And I don't advocate for people to vote green because I just don't see that as like a very viable vehicle. You look at third party politics in this country, like you look at the People's Party, you got to remember, like before there was the People's Party, like there was the people, in the sense that like the People's Party came out of like real serious grassroots organized, which is not even the terminology they were using. They were like getting together because they were getting fucked over by merchants in town. And they started to realize, oh, we need to start paying attention to politics. We can unite our votes. And you got all these poor farmers all across the country getting together, having meetings and putting candidates up for office. And then that built the People's Party, which then, had some of the predecessors to the Socialist Party. And what I'm saying, there's this fixation that you're going to have the vehicle before you have the people. And what I think it's really frustrating to me about like a lot of the discourse around this shit right now is that it's all about like, we're going to have the party before we have the people. And I just have never seen that really be a viable strategy for how we can win power.
Yeah, I think in the U.S., if you might one day see a left-wing party, but it would have to be in a situation where there briefly becomes, barring major electoral and constitutional reform that I think is unfortunately off the agenda for now, you would have to see a moment where America has four parties briefly, because there's a break in the Republican Party and there's two kind of parties running there, and there's a break in the Democratic Party. Then before long, within an election cycle, that would probably recohere into another two-party system. But maybe the left-wing party would be one of the two parties. It's happened once in American history, and that was the Republican Party. And that party led us to a glorious revolution.
A lot of people don't remember those guys. They were Republicans.
Yeah. Freed the slaves, did a lot of important things, early years of Reconstruction, that was Republicans, as, generations of extremely reactionary 21st century American Republicans would like you to remember.
Yeah, so Bhaskar, I got this question, and it's one that like I often fantasize about asking NBA players about like if they could give themselves advice at the rookie season. But
we're nerds.
I'm curious, we've like Jacobin's been around so long. It's something I remember him before moving here. If you could go back in those first weeks of you starting Jacobin magazine and give yourself some advice, do you know what you would say to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I started Jacobin well over a decade ago, between my sophomore and junior year of college. And honestly, it'd be worth knowing that it would consume my life, because it initially was meant to be a very small project. I was just going to create a online magazine, then it became a regular magazine, but I was doing everything myself. And then it slowly consumed not only all of my time, but I learned how to be a magazine publisher. And I had no intention of going into magazines or being a magazine publisher. I was just trying to propagandize, and I had a little bit of spare time one summer in between work. I was working maybe 20 hours and working, on Jacobin maybe 30 hours. And somehow that project just became a very big one. So I think I might have given myself a little bit of warning that I'm making a big decision. And I have, I crossed that fork in the road, and I'm all the way down this path, and there's really no turning back. I mean, I think it's a good thing. I like what I do, but I never really, it wasn't a self-conscious thing. Maybe that's true of everyone. Like maybe like Matt, did you have like a moment where you decided what you wanted to do, like consciously?
No, no. I remember. First of all, have you seen Fleischman is in Trouble? Because similar sort of plot going on here, where you just kind of get on a track and don't look back on it. Although I think yours is a little bit maybe happier than Eisenberg's and that. But no, I mean, I had, when I was unemployed after grad school, I remember like filling out 20 applications a day, and I'm up for anything. You want me to work for your architecture public relations? I'm that. I'll go whichever direction. And thankfully, I managed to get a job, kind of doing what I would want to have done. I don't have to do nearly as much sort of administrative stuff as you had to do, so it's a lot easier to just sort of accept it, I think.
Yeah. But also, I mean, like I'm a little bit less, not sectarian than I was then. Like I think I was like a little more confident. Like I think I used to think the Marxist worldview would tell me 90% of what I need to know to solve a problem. Now I think it would tell me like 70%. But I'm still glad I have that. Can you imagine not having a framework and then just approaching every single question like from a starting point of, I don't know what's fair, what's right or wrong? I think, I think having a sense, and I think this is why Jacobin is such a special publication, or why it's like good to be around or good to work for, because people already have the understanding, the worldview that every could can govern, like this egalitarian sense that there are, capabilities in people that capitalism doesn't use, and that if unleashed would make the world a much better place. And that was part of the core moral and ethical, really heart of the socialist movement for all these years. And I just don't think it's there in a lot of mainstream politics. Like either it's the sense that the people are idiots and maybe we need to give them more stuff, or the people are idiots, we should just take all the rest of their stuff. That's two poles in American politics. And so I'm very glad, I'm glad that I had this background and these beliefs that has just made politics something less venial. So I wouldn't miss my most sectarian days.
And we were talking with Tiare Mora about the landscape in Europe, and she said like the absence of a Jacobin is felt there, and also like the nation, like we're talking at the beginning, but I remember when I was just trying to clue myself in on the world, it was you go to these different magazines, and it's The Economist, and you could go. The Nation was the one that like has aged the best of all those. I mean, New Statesman was another one I remember, but like. And so I'm very proud to see you there as El Presidente. Bhaskar, what do you need to plug on our show?
Nothing. Well, actually, I'm nothing really. I'm kind of between stuff to plug. Obviously, subscribe to The Nation, subscribe to Jacobin, but also, I mean, people should pick up Social, because I'm in the process of finishing my next 2 books, and it's been out for a while, so sales are waning. So I need to get publishers excited about me dropping books again. I'm working on one with a friend of the show, Ben Burgess, which is a ways away. But then I have one in the Grenadian Revolution, which is pretty close. I think I could finish it up by the end of the month if I, stop, watching 2 NBA games a night after work. But yeah.
Yeah, no, now that
great audiobook too.
Now that football is winding down, I'm like, all right, I can finally get some work done. So I'm sorry for y'all.
Is your team the Cowboys? No.
Yeah, they are.
Oh God! Well, you're gonna have a little bit longer to go.
Oh, don't start talking shit now.
Yeah, no, I'm a Giants fan. I'm happy. I can die in peace. I saw Eli Manning beat Tom Brady.
No, it's good.
Incredibly fluky ways twice, and I don't need to watch another Giants game. I still do, but I don't need to.
Yeah, it's gonna be. I don't know. I have some hope, but I feel like we're limping into the playoffs, which is pretty typical. But, Bhaskar, Bhaskar, thank you so much for.
There's Bon Jovi in the Socialist Manifesto. Is that right?
Yeah, the first chapter is very heavily about Bon Jovi and curry pasta sauce. And no, I don't have ESPN Plus. I use the old, like, whatever the Reddit streams, like it's successful.
Oh yeah,
good socialist position. I finally caved and got YouTube TV.
No, the tricky thing is, like, there's so many ads, and half of them are like porn. So you have to, like, I'm loaded up with like 3 ad blockers, so I'm okay. But I can't share that link with my dad. Was asking me for streaming links. Like, if he follows this link, he will end up with spyware on his computer in about 30 seconds. So anyway, if someone has a League Pass subscription, hit me up. I will be grateful. I'll put you in the acknowledgments of my my next book. I swear to God, if you give me, hit me up with a NBA League Pass subscription.
Hell yeah.
Who you got East and West this year, Bhaskar?
Oh, I mean, they're not doing well, so it's hard to say. But I actually do think the Bucks will turn it around. I just kind of believe in them more because they have a super durable big guy. And on the West Coast, like, I really don't know. This is the most confusing NBA season for me in a long time. Like, I think, obviously I would love for it to be Denver.
Yeah.
But I really don't know. It's really open.
I want Denver and the Nets, but I think Denver and the Nets or Denver and Cleveland are my picks. But David hasn't been paying attention, so we'll.
I know. I should go to a Spurs game. I need to get that.
Oh yeah,
yeah. It's been too long. I mean, I stopped watching basketball in the early 2000s. I need to get back into it.
Yeah, the Spurs are just as good as they were when you stopped watching.
It's a fun little trip. Well, anyways, Bhaskar, thank you so much. We'll see you in a couple weeks in New York, man. Thanks for doing this and for doing that. I'm really looking forward to that.
All right, take care, guys.
Thanks,
brother. Yeah, don't forget, y'all, the link to see all of us live in New York City is below. Tickets are selling pretty fast, particularly for the meet and greet stuff. So make sure you grab it as soon as you can.
Yeah, there's still meet and greets left.
I think there's a couple. I checked this morning, but it's waning. So grab them while you can.
And we can't expand that, unfortunately, because there's only so much time, and we want to be able to. Meet and greet.
Yeah, that's a more of a bit like.
Yeah.
We could expand it, but I feel like if you expand it too much, then it's like it stops.
Well, you don't want to have to rush through people.
That's what I'm saying. It stops being a meet and greet if it's too big. Yeah. But make sure, try to grab those while y'all can, and come see us. I mean, it'll be fun to be back in New York. I think that's like, I'm sorry, like Bhaskar, Emma, Sam, the rest of the crew. I think that's just like all-star lineup. So it's one that you're really not going to want to miss. And I think a lot of people from the LR universe are going to be traveling to come and see us too. So it'll be a great chance for you to be able to not just see us, but see the rest of
some fun times afterwards. I think
there's some plans for some fun stuff after too.
Yeah.
Well, folks, we're gonna go to this Brian interview, and then don't forget, we're gonna be going to post game, and we're trying to do this more. So for Left Reckoning 100, we have a special guest, R.M. Brown, who will be joining us for the post game. If you don't know him, he runs an excellent YouTube channel. It's a lot of fun. I believe he was on the Majority Report recently, wasn't he?
He was, yes. Made his MR debut, I think, maybe in December or November.
Yeah, something like that. So be sure to join us over at patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get access to that, plus the Rosa Luxemburg reading series that will be coming out this weekend. But before that, we're going to be joined by Brian to talk a little bit about what's been going on in Brazil. Welcome back, everybody. David here, joined as always by Matt Leck. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing well.
And we're thrilled to be joined by TMBS Forever crew, a good friend of ours, Brian Mier. You know their work from TeleSur Brasilwire, and Brian's also going to be translating Lula's biography into English, which is really exciting. Thanks so much, Brian, for hanging out with us today.
Always fun hanging out with you guys.
Well, man, we wanted to, we had reached out to you earlier last week to come on to talk about Lula's inauguration and, what that was looking like. But over the weekend, some pretty big news happened as a bunch of Bolsonaro supporters stormed multiple government buildings in the capital of the country. And could you give folks a sense of the scope and scale of this action over the weekend? Because a lot of people are comparing it to January 6th, and I think there's a lot of similarities, but I think that sometimes people don't realize comparatively, they went into the Supreme Court, they went into the Senate, they occupied a lot of different buildings in the area. But could you give folks a sense of what happened over the weekend?
Yeah, there's people looking at it in different ways, in the comparison to January 6th. Remember that they did that stuff on January 6th. Well, Congress was in session during the inauguration, on Inauguration Day. These guys were too weak to try and do it on Inauguration Day when Congress was in session. So they waited until an empty Sunday during the height of, holiday season. Almost everybody who has any money, at least, and the city's area of Brasilia itself is all middle class. The working class live way out, 30 miles away in these satellite cities. It's almost completely empty in January. Most people are on beach vacations. You get at least a month to 6 weeks of vacation in Brazil, and January is the vacation month. On top of that, it was a Sunday. So even although they shouldn't have been, even the security was understaffed. Mm-hmm. So that's very different from what happened on January 6th. They made it into more buildings, but at the same time, the buildings were all empty. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that it's important to remember, people are spinning this in a bunch of different ways. I'm really pleasantly surprised with all the solidarity among the media outlets in the U.S. that supported Lula's imprisonment and supported the coup against Dilma Rousseff, now on board with Lula. That's really nice. But basically, Brasilia is a space-age, mid-century, modernist, utopian, city built to look like an airplane from the sky that was plopped down in the middle of these soy fields in the most conservative, backwoods country farming center of Brazil, with a very conservative local population. It's a city of about 3.5 million, and probably 65-70% of them voted for Bolsonaro. It's also a big center of prosperity gospel Christianity. Mm-hmm. And so the governor of Brasilia is an extremely far right-wing figure, one of Bolsonaro's biggest allies. And the way that the police work in Brazil is that the governors, through their security secretary, control the police, the military and the civil police. So basically, on Monday, this governor appointed Bolsonaro's former national justice minister and public security chief to be his district or state level security chief in charge of the military police and the civil police. And so this guy had already been under, scrutiny for encouraging an auto coup when Bolsonaro was president, as was the governor. They're not recognizing the results of the election. Many of Bolsonaro's cabinet ministers went ahead and recognized the vice president. A lot of people recognized the results of the election. Bolsonaro hemmed and hawed, and this was one of the most faithful guys to Bolsonaro, Anderson Torres. So on Thursday, Friday, I guess, he just disappeared, he just disappeared. And so when this stuff started on Sunday, the military police just opened the doors for the protesters and then played the turtle game, pretending they were trying to do something. Oh, we can't control them. Lobbing tear gas grenades in places where there weren't any people, so the smoke would appear on the camera. Meanwhile, I would say probably under average intelligence, most of them elderly white men and women who made up most of the protesters, like lower middle class to upper middle class, started posting videos on the socials, like, oh, look, the police are on our side, and the police are like taking selfies with them, calmly talking with them, and things like that. This went on for about 3 hours, as the media was like, oh, it's chaos, and the governor was playing the turtle game, and then, oh, where's Anderson Torres? Oh, Anderson Torres, the security minister, he's in Orlando, Florida. Okay, so then the governor's, but I'm really mad at him, so he's fired, right? But I'm going to take care of this, right? Another hour goes by. It's now been like 3.5 hours of these people like taking shits inside of the government building and filming it and posting it on socials.
I saw
and
that, yeah.
Destroying like, modernist furniture designed by Oscar Niemeyer that's worth like, he's got chairs that are worth like $50,000 or $60,000 that he, basically donated to Brasilia at the time he designed the city. But they're historic. The whole complex is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They slashed a painting by Di Cavalcanti, who is one of the most famous Brazilian modernist painters of all times, because he managed to create a painting style that didn't have any European influence at all, right? So this one painting, As Mulatas, it's worth $4 million. They slashed it, and they rifled through the intelligence department and stole all of its weapons and stole some classified documents. So there were some people who knew what they were doing, who were mingled in with the crowd. And at this point, Lula was visiting a flood zone where there'd been a bunch of people killed in mudslides in Araraquara, a city in the upstate São Paulo. And he came on TV and he's like, okay, I've issued a decree. The governor has lost control of the public security in Brasilia. The federal government's taken over public security. We've issued an arrest warrant for Anderson Torres. And 20 minutes later, they'd cleared out all of the people from all of the buildings. The civil police didn't side with the governor, because there's two police forces, military and civil. You need a bachelor's degree to be a civil police officer. So they're normally considered a little bit more intelligent. They are more, the degree doesn't mean anything, but in police terms. And also the federal police came in with helicopters throwing tear gas. They just showed how easy it would have been to not let them in, like clearing all 3 buildings out in 20 minutes. They started arresting people. They arrested like 900. They pressed charges against 200 people, and they promised to. They said they've already figured out this. The new justice minister of Brazil is Flavio Dino. He's the former Communist Party governor of Maranhão, and he's a smart guy. And it's just like, look, we already know who's behind the financing. We're going to go after everyone within the rule of law. We're not going to do anything extrajudicial, but we're going to give everyone a fair trial. And if they're found guilty, punish them proportionate to the crimes they committed. And invading a government building and destroying public property, and also holding a violent protest in favor of a military coup carries an average sentence of 12 years. So they announced all of this, and now they're going out after everybody. And there's been this outpouring of support for Lula from around the world. I mean, it's hilarious the way that Russia and the United States have joined behind Lula. They even offered security. They both offered security during the inauguration. It shows that they're still capable of. It's one of the reasons these guys didn't dare try anything during the inauguration. Both Russia and the U.S. had snipers up on all the building roofs and stuff. So they must have been collaborating a little bit, you would think. So it just shows what an incredible politician Lula is, because now you've got Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, China, the United States, even Italy's joined in. Fascist Italy's joined in solidarity with Lula now. And Bolsonaro was talking about fleeing, and his son's fleeing to Italy because they can get Italian passports. So, because, go figure, they're Italians, Northern Italians. And,
Greg Grandin, the author, he had this tweet that's kind of along these lines. I'm a premature optimist, but I think we are about to get a lesson in how you disarticulate incipient fascism and then inoculate against it by strengthening social democracy, both as policy and movement. I mean, do you think so? And I'm curious, like, yeah, like the reaction I've seen Lula talk about the loss of trust in the police forces, dealing with both the police side of this and the like fascist movement side of this. Do you think that are you optimistic about how Lula deals with this?
Yeah, I think he comes out of this stronger. And there are things that are legal in the U.S. because of this like absolutist Cato Institute inspired interpretation of free speech that started in the 70s, where it's like it's my moral duty to protect Nazis, to defend Nazis. That's not legal in Brazil. Like it's illegal to be a Nazi. You literally go to jail if you're found being in part of any kind of Nazi cell in Brazil. And some kinds of racism are illegal. Racist language in public against someone, that's a crime. That's considered a kind of harassment. Mm-hmm. Especially with the racial element, it makes it worse. So like if you go into a restaurant, if you're Black, Afro-Brazilian, and you try to pay for something with a credit card and the cashier starts loudly saying that you don't have any money, your credit card is no good, or something like that, that's considered a crime of racism in Brazil because it's a kind of humiliation based on race. Or if you go into a supermarket and the security guard just follows you around the whole time, you can file a charge. It's not a big sentence or anything, but it is a crime. And so some of these kinds of things that are covered under free speech in the US are not in Brazil. That makes it, and it is a big crime in Brazil to advocate even verbally in favor of a rupture from democracy, because everyone remembers the last military coup when thousands of people were murdered and tortured, and they don't want it coming back. So there's things where they were taking advice from Bannon and Jason Miller and Matthew Tryman and stuff like that. People have no knowledge whatsoever about Brazilian law, and a lot of these people are going to be in big trouble now.
And I should just make a note on the elite accountability. I do want to shout out Joaquin Castro for going on CNN and saying to extradite Bolsonaro back to Brazil. That would be the ultimate thing, and particularly that we.
Who, by the way, is in the hospital again. Right, his favorite thing.
So this is the ultimate thing when he gets his medical bill.
Yeah,
because it's a public system in Brazil. I don't think he even understands. Even if his insurance, my bet is that his insurance ran out when he ceased being president, and he didn't do any carryover paperwork. That's my bet.
He doesn't seem like the guy to do carryover paperwork.
Right? Yeah, I don't think he did. I mean, he would have to like refile something with his insurance company to guarantee coverage in the U.S. I mean, I broke my shoulder at a DOA concert when I went back to Chicago in 2010. And I went into the emergency room and I had Brazilian health insurance. And I was so doped up from it afterwards that I didn't tell them till like 30 hours later. And I said, well, you didn't tell us within 24 hours, so you're not covered. And it was like $18,000.
Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if he's got another, massive bowel obstruction, which is par for the course with him, he could be facing a very large, seriously large. He might have to flee the United States to flee medical bills, right?
Well,
so what I'm saying is, you said it would be great if he was deported, and I'm saying no. It'd be great first if he gets this massive medical bill for his bowel obstruction, and then he's taken by ICE into a internment camp and then deported.
I don't know if he'd survive that process.
Yeah.
But going back to like the events of yesterday, the big question, I think, that from what I've been seeing, like Lula is saying that this kind of thing doesn't just happen, that somebody paid for these buses, somebody organized these kind of things. Has there been any sense about who might be behind this? I know it's being investigated, but it's still early days.
Everyone knows it's the same people who've been financing the fake truckers protests. It's it's a handful of business elites, local business elites, many of them who make a lot of money off of Amazon deforestation. So like when they arrested the terrorist who was trying to bomb, people are blowing that out of proportion too. Like he wasn't trying to blow up Lula. I got an email chain from a renowned Trotskyist university professor today that mentioned that Lula survived a bombing attempt on him, which is ridiculous. I mean, the guy was trying to blow up part of an airport. Lula wasn't in the airport at the time, which is bad. But it came out that he was owner of a gas station chain that operates in 5 Amazonian states along all of the new highways they're building in the areas where they're burning down the rainforest. So he wasn't as much of a patriot, self-proclaimed patriot, as someone who was like trying to protect his business interests.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people fall into that category.
And I mean, famously, Lula was good for the rainforest. I want, like, maybe this isn't the direction you want to go, David, but I'm curious, like, you talk about this being to Lula's political benefit. What areas do you see him sort of maybe pushing his agenda forward with rise in popularity from this?
Yeah, he's Bolsonaro is more isolated than ever now. He's already, for example, Lula's already guaranteed that the public universities are going to stay open. A lot of the biggest, most prestigious universities in the country, like Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, which all offer free tuition and even stipends for poor students so they can afford to get to and from class and eat and stuff while they're studying. They were literally on the verge of shutting their doors in November. And, there's hundreds of thousands of public university students and their families and things like that. And even if many of them might not have been so pro-Lula or Pété, they're going to immediately feel the results of this. Bolsonaro had budgeted 50% cut, 33% cut in monthly welfare payments. Lula has already guaranteed through a majority vote in Congress maintenance of the election season welfare payment rise that Bolsonaro pushed through, plus an additional 150 reais per child under the age of 6. So he's increased welfare payments. He's raising minimum wage above inflation level, 2.3% above inflation. It's the first above inflation minimum wage hike since Dilma Rousseff. Since her second to last year in office. They paralyzed Congress during her last year in office when the PSDB party refused to admit the results of the election, and that's the last time. So when minimum wage is raised in Brazil, that means everyone gets a raise. Basically, like every company will raise you in accordance with that minimum wage. So that's always very popular. Now he's going to undo the liberalization of petroleum, gasoline, and natural gas prices. There was no need to do it. It was part of Michel Temer's deep austerity, neoliberal Washington consensus-style economic package, which was cited by he himself as one of the reasons that Dilma Rousseff got thrown out of office, refusing to get on board with it. They linked like gas consumer prices in Brazil to the international market for no reason, because it's self-sufficient in this commodity. There's absolutely no reason. So there's no reason why they should be raising the price of gas and diesel every day, every 2-3 days, like they do in Brazil. And especially with the war going on in Ukraine and things like that, the prices are going up around the world. So that's going to rebuild his popularity with the middle class. And a lot of people are just like scared about what was happening to Brazilian democracy, who aren't Lula supporters, who might even hate Lula, who now realize that like this was the only person who could have saved Brazil from this situation right now. In fact, the editor of Globo newspaper just retired, and he is someone. Globo is the media institution that has most attacked Lula, most lied about Lula since he was a union leader. they were the cheerleaders for the Lava Jato operation, to the point where one of his defense lawyers told me she thought that Sergio Moro was blackmailing them with so much enthusiasm. They even backed his failed presidential run last year. This guy just retired, and the last column he wrote for Global before his retirement for their newspaper was Lula has saved Brazil. And he just made a list like, let's look at the ministers. He's just swapped out a human rights minister who claims to have a master's degree granted to her by Jesus.
Divine providence.
who claims to have had a conversation with Jesus in a guava tree. You know, who says things like boys should wear blue, girls should wear pink.
Yep.
He's just swapped her out for this guy, Silveira, who you know, he's like published a book about Lukács. He's written a book about Lukács, the Hungarian Marxist philosopher. He's written a book about structural racism, and he used to play in a rap metal band. You know, he's just like, really, he gave the most brilliant acceptance speech. He's a Afro-Brazilian guy, you know, like the first thing he said is like, let's get this out of the way right now. Working class men and women of Brazil, you exist, you're important for us. Afro-Brazilian men and women of, you know, you exist, you're important for us. LGBT community, trans women, trans men, you exist and you're important for us. Indigenous people, you exist, you're important for us. That's how he opened his speech. And it's such a, the contrast is like night and day. You know, I mean, and you can go down the line of the ministers, and it's all like that. Because Bolsonaro just put in these opportunists who are literally just like trying to destroy the state.
Yeah.
So, to give a Spark Notes understanding, it's like what happened over the weekend was really horrific for a lot of reasons, but it seems like it has sort of broken some of Bolsonaro's support with some members of the public, and Lula's coming out a lot stronger from it. How is the sense of you know, the other kind of right-wing politicians who might sort of not necessarily be like Bolsonaro supporters explicitly or something like that, but they were more favorable to, you know, Bolsonaro presidency than the Lula one? Do you think that there's going to be sort of forced to you know, change their public posture a little bit because of what happened over the weekend?
Well, definitely. The regular traditional right is already on Lula's side, and it was before he took power. The third biggest party in Congress after Bolsonaro's Liberal Party, which Tucker Carlson never mentions the name of the party. We know liberal means something different outside of the US, but it's still funny.
Yeah,
you would see Lula and his liberal elites. I was like, no, Bolsonaro, literally, his party is called the Liberal Party, and they're all elites. Okay, but this party is called União Brasil, and they're the legacy party of the official neo-fascist military dictatorship party, Arena, from the dictatorship. They've already flipped sides, and they're in Lula's coalition. They've got like 2 ministries in his government. MDB, which is the legacy party of the opposition, which wasn't that much of an opposition, obviously, controlled opposition during the military dictatorship. They're in Lula's camp. They're the 4th biggest party in Congress. So Lula's already got, he came in with everyone saying like, oh, how is he going to govern? He's only got, he and his allies only have like 25% of Congress. Well, no, he's already got over 50% of Congress. So those people have already distanced themselves from Bolsonaro. What we're seeing now is actual hardcore Bolsonaristas, like former Vice President Hamilton Mourão, distancing themselves from Bolsonaro. Even before Sunday, one of Bolsonaro's top, you know, totally fascist generals, Santos Cruz, who managed like UN operations in Haiti and Congo, he gave this big interview saying the right has to move beyond Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro is not a real conservative. You know, he's a populist with dangerous ideas. He did more damage to the right than he helped the right. The most reactionary right-wing mainstream journalist in Brazil is this guy named Alexandre Garcia, who was the press secretary of the last military dictator, Figueiredo, and he hates Lula's guts. And he was kicked off Global for being too reactionary, and then they hired him at CNN, and he went anti-vaxxer on CNN. CNN Brazil's owned by conservatives, more. I mean, CNN is conservative, right? Yeah. I mean, you could call it conservative, but CNN Brazil's more conservative than CNN US. But they had to fire him too because he was saying, they kept saying, stop talking about chloroquine, stop talking about chloroquine, and he kept doing it. And so it's
amazing. It just sounds like another state in the US that we just don't hear about as much. Like a lot of this sounds very familiar.
Well, he just like worshiped Trump.
Right.
So it was running like a state like, hold on, something just popped up here. Yeah.
There you go.
It was, I don't know what you would call it, like Alabipi, Louisiana, or something. It's kind of like this mixture of the most Trumpist states, but then like taken to extreme because the leader had no charisma. I mean, at least Trump was funny sometimes. Bolsonaro his idea of a joke is like a 1960s gay innuendo.
Yeah.
That no one laughs at.
And their populism is very different too. Like Trump at least has somewhat of a connection to the people through things like television ratings or whatever, even if it's like really approximate. Bolsonaro is just like a weirdo, like with military background, right?
Yes, definitely. That's a good character. And strong organized crime ties.
Right.
Well, I guess Trump has them as well.
Yeah, that could be useful.
Like, if you're working in real estate, you're a real estate mogul in the U.S.
Hey, gotta get deals done.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and breaking this down for folks. But we, when we reached out to you, we were hoping, because this is Left Reckoning 100. We were hoping to do, be a little bit of celebration. I'll just be curious if you could tell us how the inauguration was, because it seemed like, it was pretty packed. It seemed like it was a good time for folks. But what was your sense of the events and the feeling of the country?
I was going to go, and then I canceled at the last minute because TeleSur only sent the Spanish team. And so I bought this bus package tour. It was going to be 40 hours each way because Recife is really far from Brazil. And at the last minute, I was like, you know what? They're sitting me next to the bathroom on this bus.
Mm-hmm.
I've been on long bus rides. It's an aisle seat. And I've been on really long bus rides in Brazil. And after about 10 hours, that bathroom begins to stink. And the rear of the bus is also the hottest part of the bus. And then they told everyone on the bus that this celebrity was coming because I'm a reasonably well-known like web TV presenter in Brazil. And everyone's like, oh, we want to talk to Brian. And I just got like cold feet. And I'm glad I didn't go because I had a really nice New Year's with my wife and daughter, which is what you should do on New Year's.
There you go.
But I have tons of friends who went, and it was pretty incredible. I mean, it was like when you see the photos of him going up the ramp, you see a crowd that doesn't look that big because for security reasons, and also because the security reasons, not because of like, violence risk or something like that, just because of trampling. The Plaza of the Three Powers, which was invaded yesterday, which is the Supreme Court, Congress, and the presidential palace, which is kind of like they separate the residence and the office in Brazil as a civilized nation would do. They don't make the president work in his house, but that square only holds like 30,000 people safely. So there were 30,000 people right there, but there was like 300,000 people all the way down the quad. The line to get into that secured zone was 3 kilometers long, hours before the event even started. And his wife was really nice. Me and Michael Brooks and Dan met her, when we did the interview. Super, super cool and super nice. She decided to organize this massive free concert with all of the musicians who like supported Lula during the celebratory concert. that went on till 4 a.m. for free,
Wow.
like on the quad, which was pretty amazing too. So, I mean, this coupled with the fact that it happens on New Year's Day and everyone's out all night, drinking in Brazil for New Year's Eve anyway, made it for like this carnival-like, really positive environment. Bolsonaro pulled his Trump handbook out, fled to Florida to avoid prosecution, but also like refused to hand over the sash.
Mm-hmm.
And when he fled, he didn't do the right paperwork, which is why I'm thinking he might have health insurance problems right now too, and visa problems. He didn't actually hand over power to anyone. So Brazil went 36 hours without any leader.
Wow.
Hamilton Mourão, the general's former vice, was pretending he was the president, but no one had given him, those kinds of powers. So there was no one to hand over the sash, and everyone was like, who's going to hand over the sash? And Lula's wife just came up with this idea. Well, Lula himself said 2 years earlier, if Bolsonaro doesn't want to hand over the sash, I'll just have the Brazilian people hand over the sash. So he put together this group of like a union steel worker, the president of the rag picker or garbage scavengers union of Brazil, Chief Raioni, who's this 93-year-old legendary indigenous rights activist who used to, like Sting and Peter Gabriel used to bring him to events in the 80s when he was only whatever, like in his 60s or something. And he was there, and this this guy with cerebral palsy, I have his name somewhere, but I'm on my phone today, so I can't pull up his name. But he's a popular YouTuber with young people, and he just had this like committee of regular Brazilian working class people hand him over the sash, and it was really nice. It was the first time in history anyone's ever done anything like that. I mean, literally, Afro-Brazilian woman, garbage scavenger union leader, handed him the presidential sash. So that was cool. Yeah. And there were more world leaders there for that event than came for the Olympics in 2016. It was a really huge event. The Biden administration was initially talking about sending Kamala Harris. I don't know what happened. I don't think anyone missed her. Just as no one would have missed her if she left the U.S. to go down to Brazil. Deb Haaland was there.
Okay.
So it was cool, and his ministers are incredible. Like, he has had to make some sacrifices to this coalition he's built, but he's kept the economy in the hands of Marxists. Not just the economy minister, Fernando Haddad, who did his PhD thesis on social programs during the Soviet Union. He's considered a moderate within PT, but he's a Marxist. And he was confronted by a group of businessmen in Sao Paulo. Like, well, what about this idea? You defend Marx. You defend the ideas of Karl Marx. And he was like, so what idea of Karl Marx are you talking about? And the guy was just like, couldn't name one. But in addition to him, Brazil's got this bank called the Brazilian National Social and Economic Development Bank, which is during the PT years, it had a larger portfolio than the World Bank. And kind of like China, it gives out loans for development projects in the global South, mainly in other South American countries, but also in some countries in Africa, like Mozambique, and West Africa, like Senegal, for development projects with no austerity conditionalities. So it was really mortally wounding the influence of the IMF and the World Bank in Latin America. And it's probably one of the reasons that the US government turned on him in the first place. So he's put Aloysio Mercadante, who's another Marxist economist, in charge of that. He's put the Banco do Brasil, which is one of the largest banks in the world. It's a public bank, in the hands of leftist economists. Caixa Econômico there's a federal mortgage bank in Brazil that was founded in 1814 called Caixa, which holds 95% of Brazil's mortgages. It only invests conservatively in bonds. And so when the sub-mortgage crisis hit worldwide, Brazil was completely untouched from that. You know, that's in the hands of the left still. And he turned all indigenous agencies. This is a historic first, maybe anywhere in the world. He's turned all the indigenous agencies, well, maybe not Bolivia, but he's turned all the indigenous agencies into the hands of indigenous women, you know, actually from reservations, you know, who live on reservations and stuff. Or they're not called reservations in Brazil because they weren't relocated, but indigenous lands, like people from indigenous lands, which is really amazing, you know. The Minister of Indigenous Affairs, Sonia Guarajara, she's an amazing political organizer. She's put together this nationwide coalition of indigenous groups called APIB, which has filed genocide charges against Bolsonaro in the International Criminal Tribunal in The Hague. She's from the PSOL party, which some people think is farther left than PT, but that's very arguable these days. But anyway, it's a left ally. No one would accuse her of being a neoliberal or something like that, that's for sure. He's made up with Marina Silva, who has an amazing personal story. She became very bitter with the Workers' Party and made alliances with the business community and was actually pushing the wrong kinds of environmentalism as of, you know, in Rio +20 and things like that. She was pushing this kind of like green capitalist model, but she's pulled back from that. And I mean, she was Chico Mendes's number 2 in the rubber tappers union struggles in Rondônia in the 80s. I don't know if you guys remember that whole thing, but Chico Mendes was okay, well, you guys are younger than me. It was a big, in the 80s, you know, there were all these like benefit concerts and Sting and everybody and Bob Geldof talking about Chico Mendes' assassination. He was a rubber tapper union leader. He was killed by loggers, and she was his number 2. She only learned how to read when she was 19. She grew up in the middle of the forest in Acre. And because of her and her allies, Acre, until 4 years ago, still had 99% of its original forest cover. And it was one of the only places in the world that had a functioning, really well-functioning green extractivist economy that was making all of its money off of renewable resources extracted from existing rainforests, like Brazil nut, you know, fish and things like that. So it's really good. She has a lot of support internationally and stuff too. So it's good that she's in charge of the environment. And I mean, you just go down the list, all kinds of really incredible people in the ministries, even like the lower level people in the ministries are really interesting. He's reestablished ministries that were shut down, like the Ministry of Racial Justice, who's now being managed by Marielle Franco's sister.
Wow.
She's the new Minister of Racial Justice. And she's another interesting character. I mean, she's an NGO. She started an NGO that gets money from big foundations and stuff, but she's Marielle Franco's sister. You know, like what kind of message does that send out to the family that's soon going to be implicated in one way or another? I think her son, Bolsonaro's son Carlos especially, was Marielle Franco's biggest enemy in Rio de Janeiro City Council. They're going to be implicated somehow in her murder. And now her sister is a minister. And that's not the future that Bolsonaro had planned 4 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is like, obviously we've been watching what's been going on in Brazil for, you know, a long time now, and comparing it to the US, you know, where we had these brutal years under Trump, you know, there was a lot of celebration about the quote unquote, you know, return to normalcy here. And don't get me wrong, very happy Trump's out of power. But it's a lot brighter in Brazil when it's not just, oh, we kicked out the right wing, you know, clown fascist characters, but there's a lot of things to be really excited for and hopeful for the future in the, you know, in this term of Lula's presidency.
Definitely, as long as, you know, like I had a nervous hour yesterday, thinking what would happen if the army sided with these protesters. But you know what? It was a very local thing. They were expecting shit to kick off nationwide. It didn't happen. One group of people closed a road in São Paulo. There was a road closing in Paraná or something like that, but it was temporary. So it's turned out it was really like just kind of like this localized thing with a local governor, and they've already kicked the governor out of office for 90 days pending investigation. So this sends a message out to all of the other Bolsonarista governors who got elected, most notably in Sao Paulo, that the Supreme Court's willing to pull you out of office if you try to encourage any kind of rupture with democracy. You know, so that's another good sign. So I think, I was, like I said, I was a little bit worried. There was a couple tense moments last night when the army, for example, you know, there have been these little protests in front of army headquarters around the country, which the Trump people, Bannon, whatever, they use these kind of like photoshopped photos to make it look like 6 million people are in front of this military base where there's like 6,000 maybe, and then a lot of them, a couple hundred, and they were losing people left and right. Most of them have already been shut down. But this one in Brasilia still had, you know, 700 or 800 or 1,000 people in front of it. And after they kicked everyone out of the buildings, a bunch of them went back to the base where they were camping out. And the army rolled out armored vehicles and troops and protected the people in front of that base. And at that point, I was like, what the hell is going on? Is the army going to flip sides? But it turns out, and it was reported around, it was like, oh my God, the army is protecting the protesters. It turned out later that they had set that wall up to keep people from coming in. And so the police were on one side, the army was on another side. And there were a couple hundred people stuck in there who couldn't leave. And this morning they cleared it out. So it wasn't the beginning of like a military coup. And I was worried that like the Lula administration might call on the army to step in, and then the army would just say, no, we're on the other side. And that didn't happen. So I think this goes back to the situation where, you know, the US and Russia told them they'd have no support. So I think at this point it's time to move forwards. I think they're going to systematically cut off funding. They're going to come up with some new laws regarding social media and electoral process in Brazil. And they're going to enforce existing laws and go after people who use social media to break the law by spreading disinformation about the integrity of the electoral system, you know, to encourage people not to to accept the results of the election. That's a crime in Brazil. It might not be a crime in the US in the same way, but it's like a serious crime down here. So, excuse me.
Yeah, no.
It's been a long day. I've been doing interviews.
I appreciate you so much, taking the time to join us, Brian. Y'all can find Brian's work at TeleSur. You can find Brian's work at the excellent Brasilwire, and be sure to keep your eye out for this Lula translation, which I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on when it's all said and done.
It's an amazing book. It's the first 100 pages takes place in the 3 days before he turned himself into the federal police, because the author was with him the whole time, and it goes into like this micro detail. So like the first thing, they're like, oh, the Supreme Court just ruled that you can be arrested now. So the first thing Lula does is he calls up one of his steel workers buddies. He's like, all right, go out and buy like 10 kilos of picanha, buy a couple of kilos of ribs, get a bunch of cachaça, let's have a barbecue.
This is what I love to hear. This is feels tailor-made for me sometimes. Lula's barbecue love is a very it's a very special thing.
It's a psyop tailored to David.
Yeah, exactly. He told me tell this to you.
Maybe one day I can make a brisket for Lula.
That would be amazing, and I bet he would like it.
I'd be very honored. Well, Brian, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to having you on, in the next few weeks or something like that, to see how all these things are coming into play, and hope you get some rest and some relaxation after what seems like it's been a pretty busy couple of weeks.
Well, I won't, because I'm going back to editing a news story for TeleSur right now, because there were massive pro-Lula demonstrations in hundreds of cities across Brazil today. There were more people on the streets here in Recife than there were in Brasilia yesterday.
Wow. That's incredible. Well, Brian, thank you so much, man. I always appreciate having you on Left Reckoning.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Great talking to Brian.
Yeah, always such a pleasure. Did I say this before? But Brian was texting me earlier today saying that update on the Bolsonaro hospital stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That probably wasn't sick. Was thinking it was just an attempt to try to garner some sympathy or to make him look sympathetic,
or to see some sort of in a sort of familiar place. It's like when I studied abroad, and I got a little bit
his comfort place. Yeah,
exactly. Like when I got a little bit like sort of homesick in London, I would always go up to the McDonald's on a high street Kensington and get some McNuggets, and it's like I was back home. So
you are the ultimate American boy, Matt. That's awesome. Missing home, got to get some chippies and Big Mac. Well, folks, we're going to jump over to the post game. We got special guest Arm Brown to join us. We have some updates on the self-driving car fallacy, some questions and calls, and a little bit of a vintage Mark Fisher clip that I dug up just for tonight. So be sure you don't miss out on the Left Reckoning post game 100. Continue the celebration there. It's going to be a lot of fun. And thank you, Matt. And thank you, Bhaskar. Thank you, everyone who's been listening all this time. And looking forward to the next 100.
Yeah. Thank you so much, folks, for being here with David and I for these 100 episodes. It means a lot.
All right. See you all in a bit. 10 minutes.